In the land of Canaan, there lived a young man named Joseph, the 11th son of Jacob. Joseph was special to his father, more beloved than all his brothers, and Jacob made him a richly ornamented coat, a coat of many colors. But this favor from Jacob would sow seeds of envy among his brothers. Joseph was also a dreamer. God gave him visions of the future, but these dreams would spark even greater jealousy. One night, Joseph dreamed that he and his brothers were binding sheaves of grain in the field. Suddenly, his sheaf rose and stood upright, while the sheaves of his brothers gathered around and bowed down to his sheaf.
Listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field, when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it.
The brothers' resentment grew. How dare their younger brother suggest that he would rule over them? But the dreams didn't stop there. Joseph dreamed again, this time of the sun, the moon, and 11 stars bowing down to him. Even his father, Jacob, rebuked him for this.
What is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you?
But Jacob, though puzzled, kept the matter in mind. He knew there was something special about Joseph, even if the dream seemed outrageous. And so, the stage was set. Joseph's dreams had made him an enemy among his own brothers. Unbeknownst to him, the envy in their hearts would soon turn into a plan to rid themselves of the dreamer once and for all. One day, Jacob sent Joseph to check on his brothers who were grazing the flock near Shechem. As Joseph approached, his brothers saw him coming from a distance, and their jealousy boiled over into hatred. "Here comes that dreamer," they sneered. "Let's kill him and throw him into one of these pits and say that a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams." But Reuben, the oldest brother, sought to save Joseph. "Let's not take his life," he said. "Throw him into this pit here in the wilderness, but don't lay a hand on him." The Reuben planned to rescue Joseph later and return him to their father. When Joseph reached his brothers, they stripped him of his beautiful coat and threw him into a dry pit. As they sat down to eat, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead, on their way to Egypt. Judah, one of the brothers, saw an opportunity.
What will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood.
His brothers agreed. They sold Joseph for 20 pieces of silver, and the Ishmaelites took him to Egypt as a slave. The dreamer was now a captive, his life in the hands of strangers. Meanwhile, the brothers took Joseph's coat, dipped it in the blood of a goat, and brought it back to their father. "We found this," they said. "Examine it to see whether it is your son's robe." Jacob recognized it immediately and tore his clothes in grief.
It is my son's robe. Some ferocious animal has devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn to pieces.
And so, Jacob mourned deeply for his son, refusing to be comforted. But little did he know that Joseph, the dreamer, was alive, though far from home and family, in a foreign land, sold into slavery in Egypt. Taken far from his homeland, Joseph found himself in Egypt, sold as a slave to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh. Though a slave, Joseph's faith in God remained unshaken. God was with Joseph, and he prospered in everything he did. Potiphar recognized Joseph's exceptional abilities and favor from God. He put Joseph in charge of his entire household, and the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. The blessing of the Lord was on everything Potiphar had, both in the house and in the field. But Joseph's success and good looks caught the eye of Potiphar's wife. Day after day, she tried to seduce him, but Joseph remained steadfast in his integrity.
How could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?
Joseph refused her advances, but one day, as he fled from her, she grabbed his cloak and used it to accuse him of attempted assault. Enraged, Potiphar believed his wife's lies and had Joseph thrown into prison. Once again, Joseph faced a deep injustice. Betrayed by his own family, now falsely accused and imprisoned. But even in the darkness of the dungeon, God was with Joseph, granting him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. The warden put Joseph in charge of all the prisoners, and he was made responsible for all that was done there. The Lord was with him. Whatever Joseph did, the Lord made it prosper. While in prison, Joseph's ability to interpret dreams became known. One day, Pharaoh's cupbearer and baker, who had offended their master, were thrown into the same prison. Each had a troubling dream, and Joseph, noticing their distress, offered to interpret them.
In my dream, I saw a vine in front of me, and on the vine were 3 branches. As soon as it budded, it blossomed, and its clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes, squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup, and put the cup in his hand.
Joseph interpreted the cupbearer's dream, telling him that in 3 days, Pharaoh would restore him to his position. Encouraged, the baker shared his dream as well.
I too had a dream. On my head were 3 baskets of bread. In the top basket were all kinds of baked goods for Pharaoh, but the birds were eating them out of the basket on my head.
Joseph interpreted the baker's dream, revealing that in 3 days, Pharaoh would execute him. And it happened just as Joseph had said. But despite his accurate interpretations, the cupbearer forgot about Joseph, leaving him in prison. 2 full years passed. Then Pharaoh had a dream that no one could interpret. Only then did the cupbearer remember Joseph. Joseph was summoned from the prison, cleaned up, and brought before Pharaoh. Pharaoh told Joseph his dreams. 7 fat cows being devoured by 7 lean cows, and 7 healthy heads of grain swallowed by 7 thin and scorched heads of grain. Joseph, with God's wisdom, interpreted the dreams as a warning from God.
The 7 good cows and the 7 good heads of grain are 7 years of abundance. The 7 lean cows and the 7 thin heads of grain are 7 years of famine. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do.
Joseph advised Pharaoh to store up grain during the 7 years of plenty, to prepare for the 7 years of famine. Impressed by his wisdom, Pharaoh made Joseph ruler over all of Egypt, second only to Pharaoh himself. And so, the dreamer who was betrayed by his brothers and sold into slavery became the ruler of Egypt. Joseph's journey from the dungeon to the palace was a testament to God's faithfulness and the fulfillment of his dreams. Years passed, and the famine struck as foretold by Joseph. In the land of Canaan, Jacob and his sons were struggling to survive. Hearing that there was grain in Egypt, Jacob sent his sons, except for Benjamin, to buy food. They arrived in Egypt, desperate and weary, unaware that the man overseeing the grain distribution was none other than their brother Joseph. When Joseph saw his brothers, he recognized them immediately, but they did not recognize him. The brothers who had once betrayed him now stood before him, unaware of his true identity. Memories of their betrayal flooded Joseph's mind, yet he kept his emotions in check, choosing to test their hearts rather than reveal himself immediately. Joseph spoke harshly to them, accusing them of being spies, to see if they had changed. He demanded they bring their youngest brother, Benjamin, as proof of their honesty. The brothers, struck with fear, confessed among themselves their guilt for what they had done to Joseph years before, not realizing he could understand them. Joseph, deeply moved by their remorse, wept in secret. He ordered them to leave, keeping Simeon as a prisoner, until they returned with Benjamin. When the brothers returned to Canaan and told Jacob, the old man was heartbroken at the thought of losing Benjamin, the only remaining son of his beloved Rachel. With heavy hearts, the brothers returned to Egypt with Benjamin. When Joseph saw his younger brother, he could barely contain his emotions. He hosted a meal for them, but still did not reveal his identity. Instead, he devised one final test. He ordered his steward to hide his silver cup in Benjamin's sack, then accused them of theft as they were leaving. The brothers were brought back to Joseph, who declared that Benjamin would become his slave as punishment. Judah, the same brother who had suggested selling Joseph years ago, stepped forward. He pleaded with Joseph to take him instead, willing to sacrifice himself to spare his father the grief of losing another son. Judah's selfless plea broke Joseph's heart. Unable to contain his emotions any longer, Joseph ordered everyone to leave the room except his brothers. With tears streaming down his face, he finally revealed his true identity. Do not be distressed or angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now there has been famine in the land, and for the next 5 years there will be no plowing and reaping, but God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. What they had intended for evil, God had used for good. The brothers, who had once been consumed by jealousy and hatred, were now united in love and forgiveness. Joseph's journey from dreamer to ruler had been long and filled with trials, but it was all part of God's perfect plan. Joseph sent his brothers back to Canaan with carts and provisions to bring their father and their families to Egypt. When Jacob heard that Joseph was alive, he was overcome with joy. He and his entire family moved to Egypt, where Joseph cared for them and provided for them throughout the remaining years of the famine. And so, the family of Israel was preserved. Joseph's story, from the pit to the palace, is a powerful reminder that God's plans are greater than we can imagine, and that even in the darkest moments, He is working for our good. His faithfulness and love are woven through every part of our lives, guiding us toward His ultimate purpose. Please share this video with family and friends, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notification for more valuable content.